So today I will be exploring the philosophical issues and connotations of my following quote by Lincoln Steffens. So my quote is in fact that morality is only moral when it is voluntary. So in relation to philosophical ideas and connotations, which I will get into throughout the course of this presentation, the quote correlates with the work of Aristotle in his virtue theory. I'll then talk about taxation in Australia and how this relates to it, as well as the moral principle of supererogatory. And then I will talk about elements of self interest theory. Okay. To get some context behind it, Lincoln Steffens was an American journalist, philosopher, and a uh, political philosopher and a journalist. So the connotations that he expresses is that morality is moral precisely because it is voluntary. This means that morality this would mean that morality is only valid when somebody has the liberty to act on choice of an ethical act rather than on a sense of obligation. So, much like Steffen's work in political philosophy, this raises concerns that the government should not compel nor impose an ethical regime for its citizens, but rather should encourage ethical acts of the individuals. This would mean that morality would be pursued not in a sense of obligation, but in a sense of choice and intent. So, the importance of choice and intent means that we have freedom to make decisions as individuals, but our actions will we will have to face the consequences of our actions when it ripples through society and government institutions, whether that be positive or negative. So, if a citizen has no choice in a moral act, this quote would simply say that it's not moral. It's just been forced upon them. Okay, now to Aristotle. In Nimachean Ethics, Aristotle describes choice as characterized by two things, so that it is voluntary and that it is preceded by deliberation. Without either of these things, people wouldn't be acting on choice, but rather constraint, impulse, or obligation. So choice implies that the reason is in good order since it's the product of deliberation. So he would then say that virtue then is a state of character concerned with choice. So it's an ethical theory that emphasizes an individual's character rather than mandating a set of rules. So basically, if we can focus on being good people, then the right actions will follow effortlessly. So he basically says it's like a quest to understand our own moral character. So according to Aristotle, when painting righteous habits, people will most likely make the right decision when facing ethical challenges and dilemmas. So, since he emphasizes virtue as being a set of morals and values that the Greek citizen in the context in Athens had, also being Athens being the first democracy in human history, this resets at the very dawn a linkage of ethics to free choice of free persons, a linkage in Aristotle's eyes which is indissoluble. Okay, so this brings me to my next point, which is on taxation. When facing ethical issues in contemporary life, society raises that the state has a critical role as it has the largest financial capacity. The taxation revenue gives the government an opportunity to spend money on good causes. So it is a part of the social contract because it allows people to show the benefits of collaboration, like having good institutions such as schools and hospitals, and the benefit of things in our everyday life, such as roads. Uh, so the ethical foundations of the social contract, which is supported by taxation, can be fundamentally broad. So, taxation is, of course, obligatory, and it is a criminal offence to not pay taxes. So, in relation to the quote, tax can never be ethical because it's not free. Now, this perspective does seem pretty strong. So, if it was not ethical to provide from the taxation revenue, the poor would starve, the country would be undefended, and crime would not be contained. It does become difficult because compulsion in tax seems to make society work better and more ethically. Steffen's quote would say that if one does not have control over paying taxes for this advantage, they're essentially not committing a moral act. This would also suggest that in making the moral choice to support others, this does raise that society is obliged to a sense of personal connectedness and a sense of responsibility for each other. So, this does lead me to my next point, which is supererogatory. Supererogatory is basically the technical term for acts that are morally good but are not actions that are strictly required. So, and examples may include charity work, donations, and volunteering. In doing these acts, it gives a sense of value and commitment. Supererogatory can only really be done freely. So, by getting involved with charity, society deems you as a good person. But if you were to not get involved in charity, society does not deem you as a bad person. So this quote does, of course, raise that ethics needs to be voluntary. So people freely can choose not to just follow law and what is legally required, but through voluntary acts to make decisions that are not required but are morally desired and that are morally favorable. So here's an interesting situation because legislation that is required by law is not providing justice. So justice is more than cumulative justice. Justice is treating people justly and fairly. In one sense, this perspective from the quote of being morally free can be taken us as encouraging us to go beyond the scope of law into the supererogatory principle. So, which is something that I would find as positive. Okay. So we've actually discussed this in class a few times, and this is the self-interest theory, which also linked with the lack of an element is the lack of foundation argument. Um, so basically, acting on the basis of self-interest, I think myself and other people may find may arise negative connotations such as selfishness and being egocentric. So maybe a counter argument of this quote is that people are said to act in self-interest when they people act in self-interest when they aim at their own good or to be self-interested in pursuing their own good. So the founding author of this is actually Adam Smith, and he pursues this in his work The Wealth of Nations in 1976. So Adam Smith emphasizes that without seeming to be curated by self-interest, society benefits from people acting in self-interest. So this does generally seem to be like a liberalist right wing's perspective. Adam Smith's view requires that people to be free to engage with their self-interest. So in relation to this quote, this model says that our self-interest is constrained to fit with the self-interest of others. This questions that our actions are constrained by requirements of reciprocation. So we are not totally free from the world of give and take. When it comes to voluntary acts, you are essentially using your own self interest and incentive to help others in relation to this quote. So, an element of this is the hidden benefit argument. This is the idea that people get a hidden benefit through helping people, such as grace, positive image, positive reputation, and gratitude. So, in relation to this quote, this may suggest that if everyone had to participate in voluntary work, this would maybe essentially be destructive, as the sensation received from acting in the common good would actually be lost. Yeah, okay, so that does conclude my presentation. My reference list is there, and it is also attached to my script document.